stand right here in the historic core, looking at a multi-million-dollar view of the mountains, and then you turn your head slightly and realize you are witnessing a human catastrophe. People are completely motionless on the pavement, lost in a deep mental fog. I've seen visitors step off luxury cruise ships with smiles on their faces, only to freeze in shock within 2 blocks. They look at us like we are actors in a movie, but this isn't a performance. This is our daily struggle to breathe. The system tells you that help is on the way, that the shelter system has a bed for you, but the pavement tells a completely different story. It tells you that if your check bounces just once in this city, you become completely invisible to the economy above you. Welcome to Homeless U.S. News. Canada, a country celebrated globally for its high quality of life, its sweeping natural wonders, and one of the world's most robust social safety nets. But beneath this pristine reputation lies a severe, deep-seated domestic crisis. And Vancouver is where the fractured lines are most visible. Walk through the cobblestone streets of historic Gastown. Watch the steam clock chime. Look at the lush evergreen canopy of Stanley Park. Or watch the massive cruise port prepare for the influx of global travelers for the World Cup 2026. The air is crisp, the landscape is breathtaking, and the wealth is undeniable. But just a few hundred meters away from the tourist zones lies a completely different reality. Vancouver, a city marketed across the globe as a clean, safe paradise, had become the absolute primary hotspot for homelessness in British Columbia. Across the nation, official data from the Everyone Counts National Survey reveals that nearly 60,000 human beings are sleeping without a home on any given night. This isn't just about a lack of temporary shelter spaces anymore. We are witnessing thousands of nylon tent encampments occupying public parks, while working families, teenagers, and especially indigenous communities are being disproportionately swept into the margins. Today, we are going deep into the reality of the downtown east side, bypassing the travel brochures to bring you the raw, unfiltered truth of Canada's West Coast crisis. If you believe that human stories should never be hidden for the sake of optics, smash that subscribe button right now and turn on all notifications. Let's walk these streets together. Drop a comment below right now. How does it feel to see an open-air survival camp existing in the shadow of luxury high-rises? Let's uncover the truth. Part 1. Facade of accessibility. Safety versus pavement perception. Step into the grid of the downtown east side after darkness falls, and the absolute harshness of public survival slams into focus in under 5 minutes flat. What you actually witness on the ground is a community trapped in a cycle of constant, low-level psychological distress. You see individuals shouting incoherently into the void, sudden gestures born of deep frustration, and human beings standing completely unanchored on the pavement, entirely unaware of their surroundings. This intense public display of suffering doesn't just create deep unease among local residents. It leaves international travelers who arrived expecting a peaceful vacation completely unsettled and disoriented. The gap between official security reports and the daily reality on the pavement has become a massive chasm. On paper, Vancouver is routinely ranked among the safest major cities in North America. In reality, property crime and targeted vandalism are running rampant across the downtown core. Independent business owners are facing skyrocketing costs to repair smashed windows, protect their inventory, and maintain security. While municipal reports highlight a decline in violent incidents due to specialized police task force deployments, dropping from over 6,200 cases citywide to around 5,300. The ground-level reality inside the downtown east side and surrounding historic districts like Chinatown remains incredibly grim. This unpredictable environment quickly destroys public trust. High-end fashion boutiques and independent cafes in Gastown are taking massive financial losses, spending tens of thousands of dollars each month on private security contractors just to keep their glass storefronts from being shattered. We are tracking a major surge in smash-and-grab incidents near tourist parking areas and scenic viewpoints around Stanley Park. A single wrong turn off the main commercial corridors can expose an unsuspecting visitor to intense public distress, aggressive panhandling, or sudden confrontations. The so-called safe zones for visitors have become a myth, raising a controversial but necessary question. Do shifting crime statistics prove that the social safety net is finally functioning? Or is the city simply shuffling human suffering from one block to another to preserve its tourist-facing image while the streets remain a pressure cooker? Part 2. The Metropolitan Collapse. Vancouver's Urban Crisis. The intersection of Main and Hastings serves as the geographic epicenter of a stacked, multi-layer social collapse. What is unfolding here is not a simple housing shortage. It is a structural confluence of a hyperinflated real estate market, an unregulated toxic substance wave, untreated psychological trauma, and deep, multi-generational poverty measured in city blocks rather than percentages. Everything is compressed into a few square kilometers of concrete alleyways and chain-link fences, creating a parallel society that exists completely outside the conventional Canadian economy. The underlying engine of this urban crisis is complete decoupling of local housing costs from local wages. Vancouver ranks among the most brutal, restrictive real estate markets on the entire continent. The price of rent has outpaced wage growth for over a decade, meaning that an ordinary worker is essentially one mischeck or one minor life emergency away from the sidewalk. Evictions do not happen slowly or gently. They happen overnight. When a tenant is pushed out, the barrier to re-entry is impossible to cross, forcing stable individuals onto the pavement in a matter of weeks. This economic eviction is why rows of battered tents and blue plastic tarps now line the alleyways directly behind the luxury storefronts of Gastown. The contrast is jarring. Multi-million-dollar luxury condos look down on human beings sleeping on pieces of damp cardboard. The surrounding historic neighborhoods are feeling the heavy weight of this concentration. Chinatown turns into a quiet, closed district after dark. Not because the cultural heritage has faded, but because local mom-and-pop shops have gone bankrupt trying to survive rising security costs and declining foot traffic. When City Hall speaks to the media about displacement strategies or urban beautification, they're using sanitized code for moving the tents one block out of view so cruise ship passengers don't witness the crisis when they step off the gangway. It solves nothing. It simply manages the optics long enough for the next tourist photo, leaving 2,715 documented unhoused individuals in the city core to fight for survival in a system that has stopped seeing them as citizens. Part 3. The National Ripple, Canada's Piercing Reality. When you zoom out from the streets of Vancouver to analyze the national landscape, the numbers reveal that the West Coast crisis is simply the sharp end of a much bigger blade cutting across Canada. The National Survey snapshot shows nearly 60,000 people experiencing absolute homelessness on any given night across just 74 surveyed communities. And we must remember that this is only the official visible count. It completely excludes the hidden homeless who are surviving inside rusted cars, couch surfing with distant relatives, or sleeping in hidden rural encampments away from data collectors. The velocity of this national breakdown is accelerating. Documented shelter use jumped by a brutal 16.2% in a single year, while chronic homelessness now sits at over 30% and continues to climb. Most alarming is the data surrounding unsheltered homelessness, which has more than doubled across the country. We are tracking a shocking 107% increase in human beings sleeping rough or surviving inside encampments between earlier baseline counts and the current period. But the detail that should make every policymaker uncomfortable is that British Columbia, and Vancouver specifically, is outpacing every other province in raw growth speed. The exact same forces tearing down the stability of the downtown Eastside are active from coast to coast. Sky-high housing costs, an unyielding substance crisis, a complete lack of long-term mental health support, and severe overrepresentation of Indigenous communities who have been systemic victims of historical displacement. Vancouver has simply become the visible, block-by-block survival grind that other Canadian cities are desperately trying to avoid mirroring. Despite federal and provincial funding infusions through national strategies like Reaching Home, the street counts continue to rise. This reality forces an uncomfortable conclusion. Is the country simply treating the surface symptoms in one visible city, while the core disease spreads unchecked from coast to coast? Vancouver is a canary in the coal mine, showing the world what happens when you throw short-term cash at a systemic emergency without fixing the brutal fundamentals of housing and human care. Part 4. Behind the zoning gridlock, the weaponization of real estate. To find the true driver of homelessness in Vancouver, you have to look past personal vulnerabilities and look directly at the economic design of the city. Vancouver's real estate market has been transformed from a civic community asset into a weaponized investment class that liquidates the working class with surgical precision. When you look at a skyline filled with more high-rise construction cranes than almost any city in North America, you have to ask a fundamental question. How can a city build so much luxury glass while thousands of its own citizens are forced to sleep in the mud? The technical reality on the ground is defined by what community advocates call renoviction warfare. Corporate landlords and offshore investment funds purchase low-end rental buildings, implement minor cosmetic upgrades, and use legal loopholes to evict the existing tenants so they can hike the rent by 50% or 100% overnight. It is a systematic economic purge of the blue-collar workforce. Furthermore, Vancouver acts as a Pacific magnet for the rest of Canada. The data shows a massive, ongoing influx of climate refugees, human beings fleeing the sub-zero, life-threatening winter storms of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, moving west in search of a milder climate where outdoor survival is physically possible, only to arrive and realize that the housing market has absolutely no room at the inn. This crisis is intensified by a total decoupling of local wages from local survival costs. The average service worker, delivery driver, or warehouse laborer is working full-time hours to support a luxury economy that can no longer provide them with a basic studio apartment. This isn't a lifestyle choice or a refusal to work. It is the inevitable mathematical result of 30 years of calculated policy failures that have prioritized offshore capital over human stability. The maps displayed in tourism centers are carefully curated to hide the structural rot, but the physical data doesn't lie. We are tracking a major increase in the working homeless, citizens with stable, full-time jobs who are living out of their vehicles because the rent-to-income ratio has gone completely off the rails. The house always wins, and the local residents are simply treated as collateral damage while the city bankrupted its own future, one luxury condo tower at a time. Part 5. The polarization of the sidewalk, the social controversy. The crisis in Vancouver has created a deep, highly polarized social controversy where there are no clean answers, only brutal trade-offs. On one side of this debate is the intense pressure to protect public spaces, civic infrastructure, and the tourism economy that keeps the province financially viable. City administrators and park rangers have repeatedly deployed enforcement teams to clear out established tenant encampments in high-traffic tourist zones, particularly around downtown parks, beaches, and commercial corridors. The corporate and municipal argument is straightforward. Public spaces are designed to be shared, safe, clean, and accessible to everyone. When sidewalks are blocked by permanent structures, when open drug use becomes highly visible to families, and when international visitors express fear and discomfort, it directly threatens the city's economic foundation and its global standing as a world-class destination. They argue that allowing lawless encampments to grow is an act of neglect that endangers both the public and the unhoused individuals themselves, who are exposed to fires, disease, and exploitation by predatory elements. On the opposing side, human rights organizations and legal advocacy groups like the Pivot Legal Society argue that these clearance operations are an exercise in systemic cruelty. They prove that forcing people down a block does nothing to cure poverty. It simply inflicts fresh trauma, destroys personal belongings, and separates vulnerable individuals from their support networks and healthcare providers. Courts in British Columbia have even established legal precedents ruling that citizens have a fundamental constitutional right to shelter themselves outdoors on public land if the state cannot provide adequate, accessible indoor housing beds. This has created a tense legal gray zone. Clearing the camps might restore temporary order for a tourist season, but it raises profound human rights concerns, leaving Vancouver stuck directly in the center of a conflict between optics and reality, short-term control and long-term systemic solution. Part 6, The Silent Inferno, Indigenous Reckoning on the Streets. We cannot present a truly comprehensive and authentic investigation into the Vancouver housing crisis without addressing the deep historical trauma that drives the massive overrepresentation of Indigenous communities on the pavement of the downtown east side. While Indigenous people make up less than 5% of the general population in Metro Vancouver, they consistently account for over 30% of the documented homeless population. This is not an accident of history. It is a direct, systemic continuation of generations of displacement and cultural erasure. When you walk down East Hastings Street, the faces you see tell a story that goes far deeper than a modern real estate bubble. Many of these individuals are the children and grandchildren of survivors of Canada's historic residential school system, a system designed to sever family ties, destroy language, and inflict deep psychological trauma. This multi-generational injury manifests on the streets today as complex, untreated post-traumatic stress disorder, severe depression, and a total disconnection from community support networks. The street becomes a final destination for individuals fleeing the economic isolation of underfunded reserves, only to find that the urban core offers nothing but a different form of entrapment. Without culturally informed, dedicated support systems, traditional housing and shelter programs often fail to reach these individuals. A generic shelter bed in a chaotic facility can feel like an institution, triggering historical trauma rather than offering safety. This lack of appropriate intervention means that many Indigenous unhoused residents choose a community of an outdoor encampment where they can find shared identity and mutual protection over a state system they deeply distrust. This silent inferno of historical pain is a living testament to the fact that you cannot solve a modern housing crisis without addressing the historic injustices that tore down the original foundations of community safety. It is a reckoning that Canada must face if it ever wants to heal the streets of its most beautiful cities. Part 7, The Revolving Door Compassion, Enforcement versus Outreach. The daily dynamic inside the downtown east side is defined by a tense, non-stop interaction between municipal enforcement teams and underfunded outreach workers. Every week, city sanitation trucks accompanied by police units move through the alleyways behind Hastings and Main to enforce bylaws against permanent sidewalk structures. For the individuals living in those spaces, these operations represent a chaotic, highly stressful disruption that shatters whatever fragile order they have managed to establish. Imagine being woken up at dawn, told you have minutes to pack your entire existence into a single cart. In the rush and confusion, life-saving medications are regularly lost or ruined. Legal documents required for housing applications are thrown into garbage trucks, and the few personal items that connect a person to their humanity disappear. Once the trucks leave, the sidewalk appears clean for the cameras, but the human crisis has not changed. The unhoused residents simply wait around the corner, carrying their heavy gear, and slowly return to pitch their tarps as soon as the police cruisers depart. It is a multi-million-dollar revolving door that manages public appearance while deepening the trauma of the vulnerable. In sharp contrast to the cycle of displacement are the street outreach teams and harm reduction workers who walk the same concrete paths every day. They arrive without badges or garbage compactors. They carry water, fresh socks, wound care kits, and a consistent human presence. They spend months building trust with individuals who have learned to view any uniform with suspicion. They help people replace lost identity documents, navigate the complex housing list bureaucracy, and advocate fiercely for their rights. But these workers are running on fumes, facing severe burnout and unstable funding while trying to bridge a gap that is growing wider every day. They are fighting a humanitarian emergency with Band-Aids, proving that compassion without structural backing, without actual bricks-and-mortar housing and intensive medical support, is simply a holding action against a rising tide. Part 8. The Trap of Anxiety. The Clinical Street Reality. To truly map the human reality of Vancouver streets, we must look directly at the clinical relationship between the physical environment of the pavement and the human nervous system. The downtown east side is an environment of nonstop sensory overload and hypervigilance. A human being cannot remain psychologically stable when their entire life is lived in public, exposed to the elements, and under the constant threat of violence. The street acts as a psychological incubator for severe mental health crises. When a person is deprived of a single night of secure sleep for months on end, their brain stays locked in a permanent state of emergency, fight, or flight. Over time, this chronic stress causes significant neurological damage, exhausting the mind's natural coping mechanisms and triggering severe anxiety attacks, deep clinical depression, and paranoia. The behaviors that the public often finds frightening or erratic, the pacing, the shouting, the total disconnection from surroundings, are not choices. They're the direct biological results of a mind breaking under the unbearable weight of having no private space, no bedroom door to close, and no sanctuary from the world. This psychiatric emergency is made infinitely worse by the complete lack of an integrated medical safety net on the street. If an unhoused citizen experiences a mental health crisis, they have no safe place to store their medications or attend regular therapy sessions. Backpacks are stolen, pills degrade in the rain, and appointments are missed because survival requires constant physical movement. Without professional care, many turn to the toxic street supply as a desperate form of self-medication to quiet the chaos in their own heads or to find the energy to stay awake through a dangerous night. Until our solutions prioritize the immediate creation of spaces of absolute privacy and calm, the cycle of mental collapse on our sidewalks will continue to outpace every political intervention. Part 9. Reclaiming the Social Contract. The Road Ahead. As Vancouver approaches the world stage of the World Cup 2026, the city stands at a critical historical crossroads. The latest data presents a stark and unavoidable truth. The existing strategy of throwing short-term money at temporary emergency shelters is failing to contain a structural survival crisis. Curing this emergency requires an absolute reclamation of the social contract, moving away from managing the symptoms of poverty and investing heavily in long-term, human-centered systems. Real change requires immediate expansion of permanent supportive housing models built at the actual scale of the human need. This means moving past political gridlock to build dignified units where housing is integrated directly with professional health care, addiction therapy, and psychological counseling under one roof. When you give a person a key to an apartment, you aren't just giving them a roof. You are removing them from survival mode, lowering their cortisol levels, and allowing their brain to move out of panic and back into planning. It is a long-term investment that has been proven to work when backed by real funding and community support. We must also implement strong eviction prevention programs to catch families and workers before they ever fall onto the concrete. This means tighter rent controls, legal defense funds for low-income tenants facing rent evictions, and immediate financial support for households hit by sudden medical or economic shocks. The success of smaller, climate-adapted housing projects and permanent supportive buildings across British Columbia proves that homelessness is not an unsolvable mystery. It is an economic defect that can be corrected by thoughtful engineering and human empathy. If we can build massive, complex infrastructure for sports and luxury commerce, we possess the power to build a city where no human being is left to freeze on a cobblestone sidewalk. Part 10. The True Measure of Metropolis. Optics versus life. The ultimate struggle in Vancouver is a profound conflict between optics and life, between the presentation of a clean, wealthy paradise for international visitors and the reality of human survival on the streets of the inner city. The pristine images featured in tourism advertisements are carefully cropped to exclude the tents and the suffering. But the physical data on the ground cannot be erased by a camera angle. A city cannot truly claim to be world-class when its global reputation depends on looking past the devastation of its own neighbors. The crisis in the downtown east side is a mirror held up to the entire nation of Canada, asking every citizen and policymaker a fundamental moral question. What level of human misery are we willing to tolerate in exchange for real estate profits and pristine aesthetics? Every tent lining the streets and every person standing in crisis on a downtown corner is a living signature of a system that has failed its collective responsibility. But because this crisis was created by human policy and economic design, it can be dismantled by human policy and economic design. The road forward requires a radical shift in our collective values. We must stop viewing homelessness as a nuisance to be cleared or a crime to be policed, and start treating it as a profound public health and economic emergency. It demands that we choose to see the human being inside the tent, the mother, the son, the veteran, and recognize that their survival is deeply linked to the health of the entire city. True community safety and prosperity cannot be built by pushing the poor into the shadows. It can only be achieved when we build a metropolis that ensures every citizen has a safe, dignified place to call home. Outro, the voices of the street. As the evening fog rolls out the Pacific, settling over the historic streets of Gastown and the dark corridors of the downtown east side, our long journey through the Vancouver paradox comes to a close. The neon signs of the luxury restaurants flicker on, casting long shadows over the sidewalks where hundreds are preparing to spend another night exposed to the cold coastal air. The contrast remains, written in concrete and steel, a silent testament to a system in crisis. The 2,715 human beings surviving on the streets of this city are not a separate problem to be solved. They are a part of our shared human family. They carry memories of stable lives, deep regrets, acute pain, and a quiet, stubborn hope that tomorrow might finally bring a path back indoors. They are dreaming of the simplest comforts, a soft bed, a locked door, a private shower, and the peace of knowing they are safe. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for staying with us until the very final second of this extensive documentary on homeless U.S. news. In a digital world designed around rapid distraction, your decision to sit with this heavy, unfiltered truth from the first sentence to the last word carries real human value. You are no longer just a viewer. You are a witness to the reality of our streets. If this deep dive into the paradox of Vancouver has opened your eyes, challenged your assumptions, or stirred something deep within your heart, please take a brief moment right now to hit that like button. It takes less than a second, but it tells the algorithm that human-centered, in-depth journalism matters, helping this video reach thousands of more minds who need to awaken to this truth. If you want to continue standing with us against the silence and walking through the raw realities of communities across North America, hit subscribe to Homeless U.S. News and turn on that notification bell. We are building a global community that refuses to look away from human suffering. We want to hear your voice. What part of this documentary hit you the hardest? Have you noticed this housing crisis shifting in your own community? Let's start an honest, deeply respectful conversation in the comments section below. We read every single thought you share. Let's keep our empathy alive, reject indifference, and remember that we are all much closer to each other than the world wants us to believe. Stay warm, stay safe, and we will see you in the next story on Homeless U.S. News.